Welcome back to the channel, everybody. So today we've got a doozy of a video for you. All right, this is going to be what I'm going to call the Green Beret guide to surviving what's to come in America. All right, the reason why I'm making this video should be no surprise to anyone, as we look around at what's happening in America and in society. And I mean, just recently there was an assassination attempt on the former president's life. All signs and symptoms to me point towards what we're going to talk about today being a very real possibility in the next 6 months. Okay, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name's Nate and I'm a retired Green Beret. Did over 10 years in Army Special Forces. Why is that relevant to the topic today? Well, for those of you who don't know, the ultimate job and skill set of a Green Beret is unconventional warfare. And when we're talking about environments such as societal collapse, civil war, things like that, those are extremely unconventional warfare types of environments. Okay, so the purpose of this video today is for me to transport over a decade's worth of knowledge, training about this type of thing from my brain into yours. This is going to be what I believe will be the most comprehensive guide to surviving a societal collapse that you're going to find anywhere. All right, this video is going to be set up in 4 parts. Okay, part 1 is going to be the historical implications of how societies actually collapse. Part 2 is going to be how I foresee this happening in America in the potential next 6 months. Part 3 will be surviving the first 72 hours, which is the most critical of the entire video. And part 4 will be surviving long term. Okay, so this is not a prepper YouTube video where I teach you about having 6 months of food and water, right, and a generator. Yes, part 4 will be a massive compendium of all of those things, all in one spot, okay? But parts 1 through 3 are actually the most important. So, again, the purpose of this video is to where you don't have to search any of this out on your own. It's all here. This will for sure be the longest video I've ever done. But this way you have it, you can come back to it. I'm gonna have the list of everything step by step, start to finish, from the first shot fired to 6 months later for you guys, so that you can potentially be one of the ones whose family survives this worst case scenario, okay? I don't typically use notes or, you know, I pretty much one take all my videos. This video will be different. I will be working off about 10 pages of notes I've compiled. I've been working on this video a long time. So bear with me as I use my notes as we go through this. But I don't want you guys to miss any of this critical information, okay? So let's jump in and start with part 1 of the video, which is how do societies historically actually collapse? And we'll talk our way through that. Why is that important? Well, it's important for you to be able to identify the signs and symptoms around you so that you are actually prepared for when it does happen, okay? The worst thing that could possibly happen is you are someone who doesn't see the writing on the wall and you miss your opportunity to actually do the things we're going to talk about in this video and keep you and your family alive, right? So, excuse me, I'm going to be drinking my White Claws today. Shout out to that, I guess. Not sponsored, but whatever. All right, let's jump in. Part 1, historical ways societies collapse or kind of converge into civil war, things like that. All right, there is 3 main reasons historically why societies collapse, and typically it's a combination of all 3 of these working simultaneously that makes the bottom fall out of the society, okay? So number 1, and one of the most commons, is going to be depletion of vital resources, right? You may think in America, well, we have tons of resources, right? This would never happen. We're one of the most resource-rich countries in the world. Sure, but when all of those resources are continuously being pooled into the hands of a very small subset of people, that can become a problem. All right, so what we're going to do in this section is I'm going to use Rome, of course, as the classic example of the most successful empire in the world collapsing, and we're going to juxtapose what's happening in America over Roman Empire examples, so we can see how maybe we're a lot closer to this than we actually think, right? So with our depletion of vital resources, okay, most societies can still manage if they're missing some vital resources, right? The problem is when structural, political, ideological, and economic factors prevent that lack of resource being dealt with, okay? So let's say fuel, gasoline, oil, okay? We have more of it than anyone in the world under our ground and American feet, but political issues are not allowing us to access that, right? So that's what I mean by we can actually artificially have reasons that we have lack of resources, okay? How did this look in Rome? Well, Rome initially, and as its empire continued to grow, had no issues with vital resources, mainly through imperial conquest, right? So Rome would conquer a city and extract all the resources out of that city to send back to Rome. The big ones were sacking the King's Bank of Macedonia, had more gold than almost anyone in the world, and the annexation of Pergamon, right? And again, the third, basically conquest of everywhere they went, extracting resources. So for a long time in the Roman Empire, how the Roman Empire was able to sort of stave off any of these issues is they didn't tax their citizens. Why? Because they extracted all the resources out through imperialism. Well, once they sort of hit a massive break point where they no longer could extract resources from imperialism and all those resources dried up, what they have to do? Start heavily taxing their own citizens, which led to civil unrest and some of the other things we'll work out in part 2 and 3, right? So how's that look in America? Well, look at what's happened since COVID, right? All of the billionaires have 5 to 10x their wealth, okay? We're watching all of the vital resources be extracted and pooled into the elite class's hands as the middle and lower class get poorer and poorer and poorer. It's kind of the same as taxes increase and increase. Inflation increases, which is just a tax on the poor, ultimately, right? And we're all feeling the beginning effects of what the Roman citizens began to feel. Once those sort of, and as America has gone away from imperialism, right, we stopped extracting oil out of, you know, the Middle East and things like that, okay? There's some eerie similarities to how that's happening, right? So let's jump in part 2, talk about that. Part 2 of part 1, not part 2 of the video, okay? So number 2 is insufficient response to circumstances, okay? So what this could be is defending your country in war, or any type of external type of circumstances being thrust upon the country that are not dealt with by the government or whoever's in control, okay? So, for example, in Rome, what did this look like? Well, as Rome sort of hit its bulge point, the barbarian hordes continuing to invade and sack the borders of Rome, okay? Causing huge problems for Rome. How does that juxtapose with America? Well, I think we all have watched this over the last 3 years at our own southern border, right? 20 million new undocumented people flooding into the country, causing all the same types of problems that were caused in Rome, right? So that's part 2. Again, we're looking at signs and symptoms, and America has the same ones in part 1 and 2 so far as did the Roman Empire, okay? We'll move past that one a little bit further because it's typically not as big of a deal, excuse me, but it can be. Part 3, and this is the big one by far, especially in America, and that is elite mismanagement and exploitation of the populace by the elite class. I mean, I don't think any of us are shocked or would disagree on either side of the political aisle that it is very obvious that that is America in a nutshell right now. Okay, so instead of using Rome right now, we're going to use more. We're going to use communist nations as an example, because it's a much better example for this when you talk about elite mismanagement of resources or things like that. Because what does communism do? Extracts everything from the populace, sucks it to itself, and like Mao killing millions of his own people, Stalin killing millions of his own people, Pol Pot killing 30% of his own population, right? That's very like the biggest demonstration of elite mismanagement of a country is communism, right? And in America, right, like is anybody going to disagree that our political and elite class is not mismanaging the country? I think that's one that everybody agrees on, right? Bernie Sanders agrees on it, and so does Donald Trump in different ways, right? So that's, again, the three common ways that basically tinderbox an event that causes a society to potentially collapse or boil over into civil war. And as you guys can see, when you look at America and those three things, it's pretty obvious all three of them are flared at the highest levels they've ever been. So when I say why I think we're closer than people understand, right? I think we are potentially one event away, such as if Donald Trump would have been killed, from part 2 of this video actually igniting. Okay, so let's jump into part 2 of the video. How do I foresee this panning out or playing out in America? Okay, there's going to be a few different ways, but as I look at things, any societal collapse or overthrow of a government or civil war, our own revolutionary war, things like that, you need a tinderbox igniting event, excuse me. And what does that look like? Well, in the Revolutionary War, right, the populace became more and more pissed off with the government until eventually they're out protesting, and we all know from our history books about the shot heard around the world, right, where British soldiers are there, a bunch of protesters are there, nobody knows who fired the first shot, somebody did, the whole world changes after that. Okay, so the way I see this most likely happening is following the election, and I believe either candidate winning is potentially going to cause this, and I'll explain why. Okay, so let's look at each example. Let's say Democrats win. Kamala Harris becomes the next president of the United States after the disaster we've just watched for the last 3 years. Whether it's a real win for her or not, and let's just say there was no voter fraud or anything like that, no one on the right is going to believe that Kamala Harris won the election fair. Okay? They didn't believe Joe Biden won it fair 4 years ago, and people were actually following COVID a lot less. Trump was far less popular, and it was far less surprising to have a Democrat win in 2020 than it would be in 2024. Okay, so the right is the right is not going to believe it, and January 6th, well, I think has been way overplayed in the media on what it is. I think January 6th is going to look like a toddler play date compared to what it will look like if a Democrat wins this side from the right. Okay, and let me be clear, one side protesting and being pissed is actually not going to cause something like this to ignite, and I'll explain that here in a minute. So how's the other side work? Okay, Republicans win. This, I think, is far more likely to ignite this type of thing. Why? Well, we already know the left's propensity to want to go out and riot and burn down the country, okay? Like it or not, if you're a Democrat, we all watched it during the BLM riots, the Antifa riots. This is what they do, okay? That by itself doesn't necessarily cause a complete and utter collapse or a civil war, okay? Neither of these sides do. But what does is when protesters arrive. So what we haven't seen in the BLM riots, the Antifa stuff, January 6th, is we haven't seen a massive counter riot from the other side. This is going to be the thing you guys need to watch out for the most, okay? Because it's going to be critical for you as we move into part 3 in understanding the signs of the real collapse, the big event about to happen, okay? So I want you to think about sort of the shot heard around the world when we talk about this. So in either of these cases, let's say Trump wins, you know there's going to be massive riots and protests. As the left comes out to burn down your city, like they did in 2020, the right is flared up now, and they're pissed. There was an assassination attempt on Trump. The right's ready to riot as well. So when the left comes out to burn down the city, the right is going to come out as well. Okay, and when the right comes out and is heavily armed, and those protesters clash, the first gunshot that goes off, the shot heard around the world, utter and complete chaos is going to ring out. Okay, it's going to be a singular located event at first, right? One city where this happens. And, you know, we'll get into talking about Civil War and who's going to win because the right's way too overconfident in this. I'll explain why in a minute. But that first shot that goes off, boom, once massive thousands of people on either side are actually engaged in a real conflict like that, the police can do nothing, guys. The military will be able to do nothing. The National Guard will be able to do nothing. There's nothing they can do, okay? Other than coming in and trying to shoot everybody, which, if they do that, will even spiral things even further out of control, okay? And we saw that, you know, look at Portland, right? And what happened in Portland after dealing with the riots? Their whole riot team just resigned and quit, okay? So the police are not going to stop this. They're not going to be able to stop it. They can call in the National Guard. They're not going to be able to do anything either when you're talking about thousands and thousands of people clashing, okay? You may not think, everybody thinks, oh, this is America, this can never happen. No, in America, this is the one place where it almost is guaranteed to happen. You have to understand American culture, we are rebellious, we are rebels by nature. The way this country is formed is literally by a situation I'm talking about, okay? We've already had our own civil war. And if you think this isn't happening in the world, this is happening all over the world right now as we speak, which I'm going to show you videos of places like Kenya, Bangladesh, right now, where this is happening. So do not be naive and ignorant in thinking that because you live in America, this wouldn't happen. At the end of the day, when this violence kicks off, human beings turn into chimpanzees. It's the reality of it, okay? So do not be fooled into thinking that you are safe from this, all right? This isn't to scare you. This is to prepare you, all right? Right, so once that event's exploded in a singular location, right, you're gonna see what? Riots and protests break out, especially in urban areas all over the country, right? And you might see this tinderbox event, boom, starts to flare up and the whole country is enveloped, all right? That's one scenario, okay? The other scenario that I foresee is terrorist attacks. And by that, I mean set up terrorist attacks, right? So I think a very likely scenario of something happening is something like a black church in the South is going to be hit with a truck bomb. Hundreds or thousands of people are going to be killed. They'll blame it on a far-right extremist Trump supporter. The left will come out in massive protests. The right's going to be pissed off. Come out, counter-protest, protest hits. Boom, that can set the ignite off, all right? That's how it's going to look, I think. And it's the most likely way it's going to look. These things happen with sort of an atomic bomb. A singular atom splits and it explodes from there. All right, so let's be very clear. The last thing any of you want is civil war. I hear people talking about this all the time. Oh, civil war and this and that. And guys, war is ugly. I've done it myself. None of you want it. None of you are ready for it. At the end of the day, it's not cool. It's not going to be like the movies in Hollywood, okay? And to the right, who I always hear say, oh, you know, one side has all the guns and the other side can't figure out which bathroom to use. Okay, true. However, that's not how civil wars work, right? When a real civil war or collapse happens in America, it is not going to just be right versus left. Why? Because after probably about the first 72 hours, okay, all the foreign nations, sleeper cells, which are here, okay, China, Russia, Iran, all of them are going to get activated, and those foreign countries are going to come and be involved as well, okay? And which side, I know the right's super confident, which side do you think China is going to jump in on? Which side do you think Russia is going to jump in on? They're going to jump in on the side of the socialists and the communists, right? Why? Because they know they'll be able to collapse the country, and the best thing that could happen in the world for these countries is for America to completely collapse, okay? So do not think, as a right-wing conservative, you are going to have the advantage in an actual civil war. It is not going to just be like the first Civil War, okay? Understand that. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be complicated. It's going to be chaos. If it gets to that point, it's bad news, guys. You do not want to, none of us want to live through that, all right? But if it does get to that point, part 3 and 4, how we actually survive. Let's move into that. All right. So, the reason why I wanted to explain part 2 and how these things most likely are going to look, which ignite the problem and how it will actually explode to the rest of the country, is you being able to understand, see that, and visualize it is going to give you a leg up on everyone else, okay? It's going to be a short amount of time once this thing explodes, okay? So that's why part 3 is going to be surviving the first 72 hours. This is by far the most critical 72 hours of your life, okay? And the first 12 hours is for sure the most important. Why? Because in the first 12 hours, 99% of people aren't going to do anything. They're going to watch this, or they'll be in the riots, okay? They're going to be watching it on TV. Wow, this is crazy. I can't believe this is happening in America, right? That type of thing. That's your window. This is going to be your window really to survive. And this is really aimed at those of you in urban areas, okay? Those of us like me who live in rural areas have a massive leg up on survival. That's the reality of it, okay? All of this initially is going to be urban warfare and urban environments, okay? So this is really directed to those of you who are living in urban environments. It is critical for you to do these things, what I'm going to teach you here, when you see real signs and symptoms. And by that I mean when you see counter protesters and it turns into Americans versus Americans and police can't control anything, this is your moment to enact your plan here, okay? Understand, again, first 12 hours. Why is it important? Like I just said, no one else will be moving, but you will, okay? So, number 1, if you are cognizant enough to pull this off in the first 12 hours, you will have time in the first 12 hours to exit your city, okay? You get asked this a lot about, well, how the hell do we get out of the city in your first 12 hours, okay? Once you get past that 12 hours, your likelihood of being able to survive or get outside of the city is going to plummet dramatically. Because again, while everybody else is watching this in shock, you're moving with your family, all right? So, understand that when this happens for real, okay, everything's going to get shut off. And I'll give you an example. of a video here in Bangladesh.
The death toll from the government's crackdown on massive student protests has risen to at least 174, with more than 2,500 people arrested. Internet access across most of Bangladesh remained dark for a fifth day. Police and soldiers have been granted shoot-on-sight orders amidst a nationwide curfew. Protesters are seeking job security and higher pay and want an end to civil service job quotas.
Where this is happening, this is from this week, okay? You're looking at massive civil unrest, basically the collapse of their society. And what did the government do? Immediately shuts off the internet, immediately shuts off all the cell phone towers, right? The police start shooting on sight, utter chaos, okay? When we left Afghanistan, what did we do? We shut off all the internet, we shut off all the cell phone towers. Why? So nobody could transmit in or out, okay? So this will happen. That'll be another sign for you. If your internet, you're watching this on TV, massive insane riot breaks out, right? Counter protesters, urban warfare is broken out, your cell phone tower or your cell phone signal goes out, your internet goes out. You got to move, guys. You can't wait it out, right? Better safe than sorry on this. So what do you need to do? If you catch it, first 12 hours, get out. So again, and let me talk about, I'll read off my whole list here of all the things that will actually be shut off, okay? So they're going to shut off the internet, cell phone towers, power, water, anything that runs on electricity. You won't be able to get gas out of a gas station, right? Because everything's digital now. Okay, major highways are going to become blocked, impossible to get through, impassable. Police and military won't be able to stop it. And let's keep in mind, why won't they be able to stop it? Because when this gets bad enough, the officers are going to be home with their families trying to protect them. So are military soldiers, okay? And again, your best chance here is, even if you live in New York City downtown, or you live in downtown Chicago, in that first 12 hours, anywhere in America, guys, you are less than 12-hour drive away from a extremely rural area or a forest or anything like that, okay? That's why it's so imperative that you move in the first 12 hours, okay? Now, if you have family in a rural area and you can get out to them, great. A very important thing is for you to get to a community rather than be by yourself. But one of the best things that you can possibly do is get out to a forested area. And I'm not talking about a campground. I'm talking about miles out into the forest where nobody is and nobody would expect to get to, and you wait this out, okay? So that's real survival, right? You basically are waiting out the collapse for the first 72 hours or as long as you possibly can sustain yourself. Okay, the reality is, let's look at 24 to 72 hours. If you are living in New York City, downtown Chicago, wherever, you wait and you hit the break point past 24 hours, the likelihood you're going to survive long term, because the chaos lasts long term, is almost zero. Why? No resources are going to be coming in and out of that city until the situation ends, which could be years. Okay, this will turn into massive urban warfare. Okay, why? Because everyone in the city didn't prepare. They don't have food, they don't have water, and all they can do is try to go out and procure it from someone else. Okay, it is basically, if you watch the movies The Purge, think about that amplified times 10. Okay, it's basically going to be warlord, gang ridden. You will not be able to travel throughout the city. It'll be, yeah, good luck. I mean, again, your chance of survival is almost zero. So if you get to that point, understand you probably waited too long. That's why it's so imperative for us to move quickly, all right? Because you're going to be trying to move through, all the streets are going to be blocked, all the highway exits are going to be blocked, and people are going to be waiting there to loot and rob and kill people who are trying to exit. People will be coming through your homes, your apartments in massive groups to loot and rob and kill. Everybody you thought was a nice human being, when it's collapse of society and they're going to starve to death and their families are going to die, nobody's a good human being anymore, guys. Not even me, right? And if you are not, again, if you're not somebody who's prepared, you're going to be a victim. That's the reality of it, to somebody who's better equipped than you are. So, what then, before we get into our part 4, which is going to be our massive, again, compendium of everything you need to have, we need to talk about the most important things you can do to prepare yourself, okay? Number 1 is tactical and firearm-based comprehension and training, okay? Why? Well, you have to be able to defend yourself, 1, and I see people all the time who are preppers, right? They, you know, massive basements full of stuff and generators and fuel and all this stuff, and it's an old lady or whatever. None of that matters, guys, because if you don't have a large group of people who are tactically trained and ready to defend themselves with firearms, people like me are just going to take your stuff. Thanks for prepping. It's mine now, right? You have no ability to defend yourself. So that is number 1. If you yourself are someone who's prepping for survival and you can't stop me from coming into your home, you have no chance to survive this. Okay, so number 1, tactical and firearm proficiency and being able to understand the tactical realm, how to defend yourself. With that comes in understanding how to use trauma medicine, radios, and all that. We'll get into that here in a second. But all of that is far more important to your survival than prepping the food and water and things like that. Why? Me personally, with my extreme level of tactical training expertise, I can get a group of people together. If we had nothing prepped and I have my rifle and my tactical equipment and some buddies, I can procure everything I could possibly need from everyone else. As dark as that sounds, that's going to be the reality, guys. Okay, which is also super important of why you're getting out of urban areas into the rural areas and into potentially forests, right? And just camping out, because then nobody can get access to you as you wait it out, right? So, if, right, that's the first 72 hours, okay? If, let's say we make it to day 30, okay? You've made it to a rural area, you're watching the country burn itself down, you won't really know. Radio will be about the only thing where you could possibly get information from, because everything will be turned off. Again, if you didn't manage to leave the city by day 30, you probably didn't make it. That's the dark reality of that. But if you were able to get to a rural area, this is where you want to start working on, if you haven't already, developing a good community out in your rural area. I'm not going to use the M word because people lose their mind, right? And that way, at this point, you're preparing for the time ahead, which is the system has collapsed, right? And you basically are small, you know, in a small warlord-esque environment. Hopefully you got a Green Beret friend who understands how to build a resistance force, run a shadow government, procure logistics, all these different things, right? Because again, that's much harder, right, to understand. But ideally, within that 30-day window, the situation has basically burned itself out, right? And we haven't actually completely collapsed out the bottom to where we were Afghanistan and we're just a bunch of tribes in war, okay? So again, most important thing here is being able to survive that first 72 hours to 30 days, all right? So, whew, all right? A lot of information. Again, if you guys want to archive this video, send it to your friends, come back to it. That's the purpose of this video, okay? This is going to be also, part 4 is long-term survival and also just everything you possibly need to survive, okay? You can find this information, but I'm doing the due diligence of compiling it all here in one spot. I'm going to have all the lists that you can take, start to prepare and build things on your own so that you don't have to try to figure this out, okay? It's going to be all here for you. So this is huge, actually. There's a lot to survival, guys. There's a huge compendium of what we need to talk about, of what you need to have, okay? And we're going to go down the list, all right? So first thing is we're going to call it a 72-hour bag, okay? It's not just going to be a bag, but we'll say 72-hour bag. It's going to be all the things you need for your, like we just talked about in the first 72-hour survival. That means getting out of the city, getting to a rural area, getting out in the forest. That's the one I highly suggest you do the most, right? Because no one is going to know where you are, be able to find you out there. You will survive if you can do this. And Then we'll move into how to secure your home. Again, if you're in an urban environment, it's not going to matter, but if you're in a rural area, it'd be very important. And long-term survival from, we're talking about out 6 months and past from there. But first is going to be that short-term thing. So all the different things that you guys are going to need: firearms, radios, med bags, trauma kits, first aid kits, tools, all this different stuff, and everything in those lists, right? So we're going to break it down in sections, and that way it's a lot easier to understand, and you can sort of compile it as you go. All right, so first thing is, and again, this is the most important, guys, nothing comes close: firearms. Why? If you can't defend yourself, somebody else is going to take your stuff, right? So number one, firearms. I don't care if you're a Second Amendment person, you don't like firearms. If you want to survive the collapse of society, firearms, okay? And ammo, right? So what should I suggest you have in the firearms department? Okay, you need to have, especially for the self-defense and defense of your family, things like that, AR-15 style weapon at minimum, okay? Have a digital scope and a magnifier on it, right? I also highly suggest a hunting rifle. One, can be used for self-defense, but also can be used to procure food if you're out in a rural and forested environment and you're staying there long-term and you run out of food, right? You'll be able to potentially kill animals and harvest them, okay? Sidearms, like everyone you're with should have a pistol and know how to use it, just more ability to defend yourself. And I would suggest, at minimum, you have 1,000 rounds in your maybe 5.56 for your AR-15, same amount, maybe a little bit less in a pistol, maybe 200 if you're running something, a hunter rifle like a 30-06, 200 rounds of that, so that you have that long-term if you need it, okay? I suggest everyone in your family be proficient with firearms, your wife, your kids, if they're old enough. The more people that can help defend you, the better your chance of survival, okay? If you're really into the tactical realm, okay, things like body armor, off-score helmets, night vision, all of that is going to be a benefit to you, okay? Because, again, any better way you can equip yourself to defend yourself, the better, right? If I, at nighttime, can see you coming to my house out in the rural area from 200-300 meters away, especially if society's collapsed, you don't have a whole lot of chance against me if I have them and you don't, okay? But very, very expensive, okay? So let's not worry too much about that. The firearm section is the minimum. Next, communication, okay? This is very, very important. Probably one of the most important things nobody ever talks about or thinks about in survival. Your cell phone will be shut off. Your internet will be shut off, okay? They cannot shut off ham radio or GMRS radio, okay? That is untouchable by anyone. So I highly suggest you have some type of ham or GMRS radio, okay? Something like a Bofane radio. I would have a few, make sure your family has it. Also, this is something I highly suggest you keep with you in your vehicle at all times, and your spouse or significant other have one with them as well at all times. Why? Let's say me, I travel out of town for work. I happen to be 2-3 hours away. When this happens, everything gets shut off. I can no longer contact my wife and kids. If I have a radio, I now can contact my family members and nobody can stop us, and we can coordinate. We can tell my wife, hey, meet me here in this location, whatever we have pre-planned to get out into the urban or the rural area, forest environment, something like that. You don't have that, communication gets shut off, and you can't get back home, right? Due to the major highways being completely blocked. It's yikes, guys. So something to think about, right? So I'm not gonna get into that. You need to understand, you have to learn how to use a ham radio, things like that. For those of you who are in the Northwest, I teach radio courses. We have one coming up in September. Okay, I actually teach everything we're talking about here. I actually teach courses for, so if you're fortunate enough to live in the area, you may want to consider coming to learn. Radios are the one thing no one knows how to do that is probably one of the most important things for your survival overall. Okay, highly suggest you educate yourself and you learn and get the radios, right? Moving on. Next is going to be your medical supplies. Super important, okay? There's going to be 3 different sections of medical supplies you need to have, okay? And you need to have your trauma kits, okay? You need to have your first aid kits. You need to have your medicine, right? Trauma and first aid are not the same thing. And we are going to go over each of them individually and talk about every single possible thing that you should have in each one, okay? So that you can get them yourself. A lot of companies sell put together kits, but these are just things that you need to know. Also, I teach trauma medicine courses. One coming up in August, I believe, next month. So if you're in the area, you want to reach out, learn how to do these things, that's important too, okay? So trauma kit, probably the most important thing. Trauma, so the difference between trauma and first aid. Trauma is your kit designed to deal with traumatic injuries, gunshot wounds, knife stabbings, car crashes, things like that. First aid is more to patch up your boo-boos, okay? So let's go over first our list of what you should have at minimum in a trauma ed bag, okay? So we'll go with first, our tourniquets. I would have at least 4 if you have a family, more the better. You need to have your wound packing gauze. Quick clot is the best. All right, your chest seals, ace bandages, nasal pharyngeals, needle decompression needles if you're skilled enough to know how to use them, survival blanket, medical tape, combat cravat, that's used for splinting broken bones, trauma shears, and a whistle, okay? Again, first aid is going to have a lot of extra stuff you would typically see in a trauma med bag, so if there's some things you think are missing there, just stand by. All right, that is, again, at minimum what you need to have in your trauma medical bag, all right? Let's move into our first aid kits that we should also have, because again, we may need to sustain long term, right? So we need to have adhesive bandages, alcohol peroxide, cold packs, gauze, eye drops, hand sanitizer, soap, thermometer, Q-tips, flashlight, tweezers, masks, scalpel, elastic bandages, gloves, betadine, sterile wipes, syringes. Yeah, and there's probably some more too. That anything I missed, guys, again, this is a huge list. Throw it in the comment section so we can get an even better list going for everybody, okay? That's our first aid compendium that we need to have, right? So all that so kind of trauma, first aid together, kind of have a huge list. Again, I'm not gonna go over what every single one of these is and used for. You need to go and take a trauma medicine class, understand how this is, and also be a 6-hour video if I did that, all right? But at least this is a list so you guys can look these things up, see what they are, see how to use them, and know what to get, all right? And then 3, this is the one nobody ever really thinks about when they're preparing for something like this, medications. Medications are super important if you're gonna try to survive and survive long term. Number 1, nobody thinks about, antibiotics, okay? Because infections will kill you, right? And if you get an infection and society's collapsed, you're hosed. And you trying to get to a pharmacy that's already been looted, not gonna be great, okay? Yes, antibiotics are typically prescription, but there are companies out there that you can get basically a survival prescription kit that comes with, you know, a year's supply of all these sorts of different things, and they'll give you a prescription for it. It's not hard to do, okay? So just, you can Google companies that do it. I highly suggest that you guys do that, because again, worst case scenario, you manage to sort of escape the city, you're out in the forest, you survive, you get cut, you get an infection, you end up dying from an infection because you didn't have antibiotics and there's no way to get back and get any, okay? So, number 1, antibiotics, of course, pain medications, cold and flu medications, things like aloe vera, antidiarrheal, and allergy medications, okay? On top of that, things like epinephrine pens, if anybody's allergic to anything, and anything that you specifically need medically and medication-wise to keep yourself alive, okay? So that's our sort of 3 sect of our medical section, okay? So next, what we need to go into, and all of this needs to be in your 72-hour bag that you take with you, right? And also, it's all stuff you need to have, even if you're procured in a safe place in a rural environment, okay? There's crossover, but you need to make sure you have this when you head out in your 72-hour survival kit. All right, next one is our survival tools, okay? There's a lot of these too, okay? So we're gonna go down list of survival tools that you should have, and these are especially important if you're trying to survive out in a forest or something like that, okay? So you're gonna need to have survival knives, okay? These are heavy duty S knives. You can use them for cleaning animals. You can use them for chopping wood, all sorts of different stuff, okay? So actual survival-based knives. An axe / hatchet, super important if you need to cut down trees, you need to have fires, stay warm, different stuff like that. A multi-tool, which is basically a tool that's got pliers, screwdrivers, knives, all sorts of different things, comes in one nice little tool. An e-tool or a shovel, good for digging things. If you know you gotta dig a slit trench, which is a place to use the bathroom in and cover up, you want to have something like that, right? All right, flashlights, lanterns, obvious stuff for being out in the woods at night. Carabiners, hammers and nails. A good rucksack so that you can carry a lot of the stuff packed away in, and you don't have to have a bunch of different bags that you're grabbing, all right? Paracord bracelet, you need to have a compass, map and protractor, okay? I would highly suggest if you have a plan to escape out into the woods, you have a pre-planned location, you have a map to that location, and you understand how to use a map and compass so that you don't get lost in the woods and end up dying that way, okay? Jet boil, so if you don't know what a jet boil is, it's basically just a way to boil water, okay? That can be very important when you're in a survival scenario. Magnesium fire starter, waterproof matches, waterproof lighters, a window hammer if you need to break out a window or anything like that safely, rope saws, tent hammock is obviously one for, you know, good to have shelter as well. Headlamps, dry bag, so specific type of bag that is waterproof, keeps all your stuff that you can't get wet dry. Portable jumper cables. I highly suggest you have these because it's great if you escaped and you got out to a rural area or out to a forest. Your car battery goes dead because you're out there for a while and now you're stuck. Okay, so portable jumper cables, not a bad thing to have. Yeah, I think that is going to do it for the tools. Okay, and there's probably a few others here and there, but this should be a pretty good list. All right, let's talk about now, let's say long-term survival. Let's see where my notes are here on this one. Here we go. Okay, so this is kind of, let's say you've gotten out into, you know, this is your 30 to 6 months. You've gotten to a rural area and you're holding down the fort, trying to wait out the collapse, okay? Obvious ones. You need to have food and water that can last you for the duration, okay? So I highly suggest you have 6 months supply of preserved food, right? Whether it be canned food, MREs. If you're gonna get MREs, I think the winterized ones are the best because they're the best tasting. All right, generators. Generators are gonna be obviously super important so that you can power your home. If it's freezing cold outside, you can at least have your heaters running, things like that. Solar panels, very important way. So if you run out of fuel eventually, you can still potentially charge some of your things using solar panels. And then obviously, you know, you always hear some people talk about a generator, but to power the generator, you need fuel and you need a significant amount of fuel. How you want to try to get that and store that, that's up to you. But also fuel for your vehicle, because as I mentioned, if a real collapse happens, there's going to be no getting anything out of the gas station, okay? It's going to be whatever you have and you can procure. So having enough fuel to potentially move a location at least is going to be very, very beneficial to you. All right, now, things you can do to secure your home. Let's say you manage to get to your cousin's farm out on a ranch. You still have to be cognizant that potentially people are fleeing themselves and potentially don't have anything and are going to try to take yours, okay? So important things to secure your home, all right? Barriers over the windows, doors. And again, this is long-term stuff, right? Board everything up that you can, every locks that you can. Also, I would highly suggest check your doors, okay, on the hinges. Take out your screws, the hinges that socket into the door, the wall itself for your door. You're gonna have 1-inch screws on your doors. What I highly suggest you do, go down to Home Depot, get 3-inch screws and replace those 1-inch screws with 3-inch screws. What's that gonna do? It's gonna make it almost impossible for your door to get kicked down off of its hinges, okay? So replace those. This is stuff you should probably prep and do ahead of time. All right, for your windows, okay, your windows, highly suggest you have window screens that are sort of thick, darkened out screens, okay? Multi-purpose. Why? When you're defending your home, especially, you know, if you're in a rural area and you have long open areas, you can defend your home with your rifle from inside of your window, and those darkened out screens will make it so people outside your home cannot see into the window, but you yourself can offset from that window 3-4 feet into your room and effectively take shots on anybody you need to, okay? So just a pro tip on how to set up your windows to where that you can use your home as a defensive fighting position from, okay? Again, upgrade your locks. Highly suggest that you have cameras all around your house, things like that. The things can be monitored, all right? Again, so a lot of stuff that you guys can do on top of that, you can look into, but that is, that's gonna be sort of the compendium. We're nearing an hour long. So, ultimately guys, again, might not be able to watch all this video at once, but I highly suggest this is a video that you hold on to. Share this with your friends and family members, okay? You know, I'm sure I missed some things, right? Like, again, you can see how big information. Also, could things play out differently than like I envision? Of course, right? There's no, fortunately, there's no perfect playbook to, you know, how these things ignite, how they happen. But hopefully with me doing this and historically looking at how these things